Story 1. Cherry Mahan disappeared after getting off her school bus 50 feet from her house and was never seen again. Recently, a woman came forward claiming to be her, but she was proven not to be Cherry Mahan. Story 2. I would like to know what happened to Judy Smith. She went missing while on vacation in Philadelphia, and her body was found months later in North Carolina. I would also like to know where the art stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is. Story 3. The lead masks case is peculiar. Two young radio technicians from Rio de Janeiro were found dead on a hillside one summer day. They were dressed in business suits and raincoats despite the hot August weather, and both wore eye masks cut from sheets of lead. A small notebook near them contained the instructions. 16h30 estar no local determinado. 18h30 ingerir cápsulas. Após efeito, proteger metais. Aguardar sinal, máscara. Translation: 16:30 be at the specified location. 18:30 ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal, mask. Nobody seems to know what that means or why the men did what they did. Story 4. The motive of the Las Vegas shooter and why no one talks about that event anymore. Story 5. Originally it was the boy in the box. They have since discovered his identity, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, but I would still like to know who killed him and why. I also think about the case of Selena Mays, who disappeared from the Philadelphia area on the New Jersey side when I was a little girl. She was 12 years old and 9 months pregnant. Story 6. The Dardine family homicides have horrified me since I first learned about them. In 1987, a family of 3, soon to be 4, lived in Ina, Illinois. Keith, his wife Elaine, who was heavily pregnant, and their young son Peter. More than 10 murders had been committed in the 2 years before the family's deaths. Keith was actively looking to move his family to a safer area, but they never got the chance. One night, an intruder entered their home without any sign of forced entry, despite Keith being careful about who came near his family, and beat Elaine so severely that she went into labor. The newborn daughter, who was to be named Casey, and Peter were also beaten to death with a baseball bat Peter had received as a present earlier that year. The killer laid all 3 victims together in a bed. Keith was taken from the scene alive in his own vehicle, which was later found at a police station. He was found the next day in a field, shot 3 times and sexually mutilated. Story 7. Probably not the most interesting, but I have been obsessed with D.B. Cooper since I was a kid. Story 8. Sneha and Phillips. Sneha and Phillips disappeared around the time of the September 11, 2001 attacks. She lived 2 blocks from the World Trade Center, so many assumed she died in the attacks. Investigators uncovered aspects of her life that raised questions. She reportedly frequented lesbian bars and sometimes went home with women, and had a history of alcohol abuse. Her husband and family deny these claims. Her husband says she began avoiding men after a coworker assaulted her at a bar. Surveillance footage from a shopping mall shows her with an unidentified woman. Credit card records confirm she purchased lingerie that day. Low-quality security footage from her building's lobby shows a woman resembling her running out at the time the towers were struck. But it has not been confirmed that the person is her. What happened to her remains unclear. Did she run away with a partner? Was she killed in the September 11, 2001 attacks? Was something more sinister involved? Who was the woman seen with her on closed-circuit television the day she disappeared? Is the family covering something up? Or are the police mistaken? Was she the person in the lobby footage? Story 9. In New Zealand, a young girl was murdered 2 streets away from where I now live. It happened in 1976. Her name was Tracy and Patient. She is always in my thoughts when I pass her street. Her murder remains unsolved. Story 10. As someone who researches my family tree, I am struck by how many people can simply disappear. There are no death records and no travel records. They are just gone. Story 11. Bryce Laspiza went missing after an hours-long ordeal during which he was frequently in contact with his parents by phone, but made little progress toward his destination and offered no clear justification. His parents even asked a local person to help him get onto the highway, which he did, but he continued to make no meaningful progress. He never made it home. His vehicle was eventually found after an accident. There was some blood, but not a large amount. The car was near a body of water. He was not in the vehicle and has never been located. The evidence suggests he may have been experiencing a mental health episode or impairment from drugs affecting his decision-making. He may have dissociated during the trip and died by suicide in a way that made him hard to find, or he may have tried to disappear. He is so distinctive that it is hard to believe no one would have seen him. This case is frustrating because he went missing while people were actively keeping tabs on him and speaking with him intermittently. It does not feel like a situation that should have loose ends. Story 12. Disappearance of Andrew Gosden. Andrew Paul Gosden, born July 10, 1993, disappeared from central London on September 14, 2007 at age 14. On that day, he left his home in Doncaster, South Yorkshire, withdrew £200 from his bank account and bought a one-way ticket to London from Doncaster Station. He was last seen on closed-circuit television leaving King's Cross Station. Despite numerous national appeals for information in the years following his disappearance, his reason for traveling to London and his subsequent fate have not been established. In December 2021, detectives investigating the case arrested 2 men on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking in relation to his disappearance. Both men were released under investigation while inquiries continued. In September 2023, police confirmed that the men had been eliminated from the investigation. They are believed to be the first arrests made in connection with his disappearance. An image from the footage at King's Cross Station appears haunting. There is a subreddit dedicated to theories about his disappearance called Andrew Gosden, where some people speculate he was groomed online, lured to London, and killed. Story 13. Alexandra Wywerchuk was a young nurse in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, who went for a walk one spring night in 1962 and never returned. 2 weeks later, her body was found in a shallow grave by the river that runs through the city, mere blocks from her home. The case remains unsolved. Police continue to seek witnesses despite finding deoxyribonucleic acid after an exhumation. I became fascinated when I discovered her next-door neighbor, across the alley on the next block, was a man named Sanford Clark, whose story is a rabbit hole of its own. Story 14. Jack the Ripper is unsolvable without time travel. Victorian London fascinates me. Story 15. My mind always goes back to Brandon Swanson. 19-year-old Brandon Swanson drove his car into a ditch on his way home from a party on May 14, 2008. He called his parents, said he was okay, and asked them to pick him up. After searching for a bit, his parents couldn't locate him, so Brandon said he could see the lights of a nearby town and would start walking in that direction. He stayed on the phone with his parents as he walked. While cutting through a field, his parents suddenly heard him say, "Oh shit," and then the call went silent. Although his car was found, Brandon and his personal belongings were never discovered. Story 16. I have one that is personal. My great-grandfather was murdered in 1925. It was never solved. It is a pretty crazy case. Conspiracy, rumors, blackmail, and, of course, murder, if anyone is interested in reading about it. Story 17. In the JonBenet Ramsey case, investigators have deoxyribonucleic acid evidence, but it is unclear why they conducted a familial search to find the killer. You would think a child killer would be a priority. Story 18. Amber Tuccaro was from Nisku, Alberta, Canada. The police released audio that sounds like her speaking to the person who killed her while he was driving her to the place where she was killed. It is hard to listen to. I used to work in the oil field there when she went missing, and there was almost nothing reported about her at the time. I came across the story later in life, and it has always bothered me. I could have been driving on the same road she was on and probably drove near that location around the same time. Story 19. The Setagaya family murder. The entire family was killed in a shocking manner. The killer even remained at the house, and the perpetrator was never identified. The house still stands with their belongings inside, while nearby houses have been torn down, a process that had begun before the murders. Story 20. The 1922 Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany are definitely noteworthy. Story 21. Susan Powell's disappearance remains unsolved. Her husband has been a suspect, but how, why, and where her body might be remain unknown. Many people who might have known something are now deceased, so the case may never be resolved. Story 22. Zodiac Killer. My granddad looks just like the sketch, and he was in the Bay Area at the time. Story 23. There are two that hold my attention. 1. The identity of the middle child in the Allenstown Four from the Bear Brook case. All four were victims of serial killer Terry Petter Rasmussen. He murdered them and left their remains in two 50-gallon steel barrels in Bear Brook State Park in New Hampshire. 3 of the victims were identified. Mother Marlies Honeychurch and her 2 daughters, Marie Vaughn and Sarah McWatters. The 4th was a girl between Marie and Sarah in age. Deoxyribonucleic acid analysis showed that this middle girl was Rasmussen's daughter, but her identity is otherwise unknown. It would be poignant for her to have her name returned. There is an excellent multi-part podcast about the case. 2. What happened to the Lateran wives in the 12th century? In the 12th century, the Catholic Church convened several synods or ecclesiastical councils to address canon law and rules for clergy. The First and Second Lateran Councils, held in 1123 and 1139 Common Era respectively, imposed strict rules on clerical marriage and concubinage. They declared that clerics were not allowed to marry or live with women unrelated by blood, declared such relationships invalid with any children considered illegitimate, and ordered clerics to put away their wives or suffer excommunication. Presumably some married clergy left the church to stay with their wives, but many did not. The fate of the women affected by the Lateran mandates was rarely recorded. We do not know how many joined religious life, returned to family, were forced to support themselves, or how many children were left fatherless and stigmatized. Whether any women were killed by their clerical partners is unknown. The fate of these women remains largely a mystery. Story 24. I have been following the disappearance of 5-year-old Dulce Maria Olives, who went missing at a New Jersey park after I received the America's Missing broadcast emergency response alert. Since then, her mother has given numerous televised interviews that have attracted significant attention, but there have been few leads. Story 25. Representative Hale Boggs and Representative Nick Begich disappeared in a plane over Alaska, and their bodies were never recovered. The podcast Missing in Alaska covered the case but did not reach any solid conclusions. Story 26. Maura Murray, a University of Massachusetts nursing student, disappeared in 2003 in New Hampshire. She drove to the White Mountains for unknown reasons, had a minor car accident on a rural road, and was never seen again. Story 27. The Yuba County Five were 5 men returning from a basketball game who were found dead about 100 miles off their planned route on top of a mountain during a blizzard. The more you investigate, the stranger the case becomes. Story 28. How is it that we still do not know who planted the pipe bombs near the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee on January 6th? People often say it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, but that feels like reality jumping the shark. Story 29. The disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit. She disappeared in the early morning hours of June 27, 1995, soon after telling a colleague that she had overslept and was running late for work. Because there were signs of a struggle outside her apartment, she is believed to have been abducted. Extensive investigations failed to uncover any clues to her disappearance, and she was declared legally dead in 2001. Story 30. Gertrude Tompkins, known as Tommy, was a member of the Women Air Force Service pilots during World War II. She took off from Los Angeles in a brand new P-51 Mustang fighter and vanished. She was supposed to ferry it across the country, but she never arrived at her first stop. Story 31. Sorry, I can't provide or reproduce the content at that link. It's a location-based request for copyrighted text. I can, however, provide a concise summary of the article. Create a version rewritten and cleaned for Azure text-to-speech if you paste the text you want processed. Edit or correct any text you paste here. Which would you like? Story 32. Murder of Missy Beavers. It is really strange, and it might still be solved. Plenty of the principals are still alive, and it seems that someone may know something without even realizing it. Story 33. David Glenn Lewis is a compelling case. We have some information about his last known movements and learned his fate much later, yet many questions remain. While his family was away on a shopping trip during Super Bowl weekend in 1993, Lewis was seen acting unusually in Dumas, Texas, where he lived. He was observed on the morning of the Super Bowl and then disappeared. His abandoned vehicle was found near home. Evidence suggested he may have boarded a plane to Dallas or Los Angeles, but he never arrived. There were suspicious financial transactions and alleged sightings, but the case went cold and his family had no answers. 11 years later, a Washington state detective used newer forensic technology to solve long-term missing person and John or Jane Doe cases. One case involved a man found walking in the center of a highway near Moxie, Washington, on the night of February 1, 1993. He was struck in a hit-and-run and pronounced dead at the scene. The vehicle was never identified, and it took 11 years to identify him. That John Doe was identified as David Glenn Lewis, but the discovery raised new questions. Why did he travel roughly 1,600 miles to a place where he had no known ties? How could he have made such a trip in a short time if he was seen in his hometown the same day? Why was he walking in the center of a highway at night, wearing clothing witnesses said was atypical for him in an unfamiliar area? Theories include foul play possibly connected to his work as an attorney and the possibility of a voluntary disappearance following a mental health crisis. None of these explanations fits perfectly, and each leaves unanswered questions. It is a compelling case with many detailed analyses available. Story 34. Amy Lynn Bradley disappeared from a cruise in Curacao while with her parents and brother. I learned about the case several years ago and was aware of the sightings, but I cannot get over the idea that she might still be alive, possibly held against her will. Story 35. The disappearance of the Sodder children in 1945 remains unsolved. A house fire, mysterious phone calls, and inexplicable clues raise the question. What really happened that Christmas Eve? Story 36. Johnny Gosch grew up in Iowa in the 1980s. Story 37. The real identity of the Istel woman or Peter Bergman. Story 38. Ireland's Vanishing Triangle. The Missing Women from the 1990s. Story 39. Eastern Airlines Flight 980 ended up off course and crashed into Mount Yamani in Ecuador on January 1, 1985. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were never recovered because there was a large amount of interference on several fronts during the investigation. So the details and the cause of the crash were never determined. The general consensus in the aviation community is that there was a conspiracy to cover up illegal operations by the airline. Barely Sociable has a well-regarded video on the topic, and I am reading a book written by a pilot and union representative for Eastern Airlines at the time that discusses the crash and shady dealings within the airline that eventually led to its shutdown. Story 40. I spent days and nights researching the deaths of David Crowley and his wife and daughter while he worked on a gray state. I check in from time to time to see if a better theory exists to explain the circumstances because I will never believe it was murder or suicide. Story 41. Lord Lucan. A theory suggests his friends helped him escape, but at some point he wanted to return. He was then dispatched to buy his silence because he had become a liability and a loose cannon who would have implicated them all. I have always suspected that Lady Lucan and John Aspinall knew far more than they admitted. The elderly man in Australia is not him either. Story 42. In our small town there was a girl who was a grade below me whose mother went missing. She left work one day, and a few hours later her car was found engulfed in flames 2 blocks from their house, but her mother was nowhere to be found. To this day, 17 years later, she still has no answers and there have been no leads. I feel for her and pray she finds closure. Story 43. Who on earth took the Skittles I bought for a girl in 4th grade? Because of that, she didn't want to date me. Story 44. I feel that America has many examples that could be most fascinating, but nothing in England will surpass the media dominance Madeleine McCann continues to have. Story 45. I want to know what happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 for the families and the victims. They deserve closure. It is fascinating to learn how investigators search for something so remote. Story 46. Unresolved crime. 1986 theft of Picasso's Weeping Woman from the National Gallery of Victoria. It does not fascinate me, but others might like it. Story 47. Sandy Irvine and the missing Mount Everest camera. It seems we may be closer to solving that mystery. Story 48. This is a local case. Missing person Ryan Stucca from Sun Peaks, British Columbia, Canada. He left a house party in 2018 and disappeared. Extensive searches were conducted and continue to this day. His mother, Heather Stucca, wrote a book called Missing from Me. The case remains open. Ryan liked dinosaurs, so supporters make plastic dinosaur toys containing quick response codes that link to his story. These toys have been left all over the world. Story 49. Jason Jalkowski has been missing for almost 25 years. He was walking to catch a ride to work. There was a 15-minute window between the last time someone saw him and when he was supposed to get the ride. It is as if he disappeared into thin air. Story 50. I generally find unsolved cases more interesting than solved ones. Jack the Ripper, of course, the severed arm mystery in Pennsylvania in the 1930s or 1940s, and the death of David Shearer in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania in 1915. His body was severely mutilated when he was found, but it is thought he had committed suicide a few days earlier and his body had been partially eaten by rats. One odd case is the West Ham disappearances. At least 3 girls who all lived on the same street disappeared, which seems unlikely to be a coincidence. Amelia Jeffs was found in a closet in a house under construction. It was thought that the builder of the house or someone in his family had done it. Coincidentally, Bertha Russ was found dead in East Ham, in a closet in a house under construction. I would like to know whether the builder was the same person who was a suspect in Amelia Jeffs's murder. Story 51. In 1966, the Ruth Holland murder occurred in Fabens, Texas. She lived across the street from us. My mother saw her with a younger man at the store. A couple of days later, her car, a gold Cadillac, went missing while his car remained. They found her car at the El Paso airport with her body in the trunk. Story 52. The murders of Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames. 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. was executed for the crime, but there is little evidence tying him to the murders. Story 53. Trevor Deely is an Irishman who apparently disappeared from a Dublin street in 2000. Story 54. I do not recall the last name. In the 1990s in Florida, a beautiful baby named Sabrina went missing from her crib. I will never forget it because it was one of the first crime shows I watched. I always suspected the parents. Story 55. The Springfield 3. I was a young child living about 20 minutes away when it happened. Story 56. Trudy Appleby is a semi-local case for me. My aunt and uncle were once neighbors of her parents. She was 11 years old when she disappeared in 1996. A friend of her father was suspected and was later charged with child molestation in a different case. But Trudy has never been found and we do not know for sure what happened. Her mother was hit and killed by a drunk driver while walking across the street a few years ago. I can only hope we find out what happened in her father's lifetime. Story 57. Cindy James. Did someone do that to her, or did she do it to herself? Story 58. I would like to know what happened to Kieran Horman. It is a sad case. He was a 7-year-old boy who disappeared one day at school and has not been found. The leading theory has been that his stepmother harmed him, mostly because she was the last person to see him alive, but investigators were never able to prove it. It is heartbreaking that his family has had to suffer for the last 14 years without knowing what happened. Story 59. I have been fascinated by the disappearance of Andrew Gosden in the United Kingdom. He went to London one day and never returned. What happened to him? Story 60. What happened in Joan Rish's kitchen, and where is her body? Story 61. I forgot the names and exact details, but 2 Dutch college students went missing in Panama. A foot was later found, and strange photos were recovered from their cell phones. Story 62. Nexpo made a video about the Save Our Souls sign that was found in a very dangerous mountain valley in Japan. The letters were formed from huge logs, which suggests the person or people had tools and time to build it. A skeleton with broken leg bones was found near the sign, but investigators still do not know who made it, and there is no way the person they found could have built it. The identification found on the skeleton did not belong to the body. Very unsettling. Story 63. I washed a pair of socks but only found one sock in the dryer. Story 64. The aerial school landing in Rua, Zimbabwe. More than 40 schoolchildren reportedly saw an unidentified flying object and interacted with the beings, saying they received telepathic communication. The case was investigated by John Mack, who was head of the Harvard Department of Psychiatry at the time. He concluded that the children were not lying, were not influenced by cultural archetypes, and were not misinterpreting something ordinary. The children are now in their 40s and stand by what they saw. Story 65. I watch unsolved mysteries almost every night. The case that sticks out is Lenny Dirksen. A mysterious stranger shows up at his house. They leave together, and Lenny never returns. There does not appear to be any plausible theory. Story 66. The disappearance of Antoinette Cayedito. The person who called 911 and claimed to be her, and the person in the background demanding who said you could use the phone, is absolutely intriguing. I am a big fan of Lazy Masquerade on YouTube. He has some excellent videos and mentioned another YouTuber who covers Japanese mysteries. I cannot remember his name. Lazy has mentioned him a few times. Definitely worth checking out at 3 a.m. when you are alone and in the mood to be scared. Story 67. The case of my disappearing Digimon action figure began when I turned around for 10 seconds and it was gone. That was over 20 years ago, and I still have no possible explanation. Story 68. Why Shelly Miscavige hasn't been seen publicly since 2007. Story 69. The lead masks case. What happened and why? Aliens? A conspiracy? Story 70. It is absolutely surprising to me that the West Memphis 3 have not been mentioned yet. Are we over that case? Story 71. Who was the voice that said if you build it, they will come in Field of Dreams? Story 72. All the people on the Global Missing Kids website. Story 73. The Amelia Earhart case is first, with the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa a close second. I would also like the killer of JonBenet Ramsey to be brought to justice in my lifetime. Story 74. The Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains in 1959 under uncertain circumstances. Their camp was on the eastern slopes of Koletsyakhl, which roughly translates to Dead Mountain. Overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. After the bodies were discovered, a Soviet investigation determined that 6 had died of hypothermia and 3 from physical trauma. 1 victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small skull fracture. 4 bodies were found lying in running water in a creek. 3 of these had head and facial soft tissue damage. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. Story 75. Cindy James repeatedly reported that she was being harassed and stalked by an unknown person. The situation escalated to assault, but because the claims were so outlandish and lacked evidence, the authorities suspected she was fabricating them. That changed when she was found murdered. Story 76. I know he was convicted, but I want to know with certainty that Richard Allen is responsible for the Delphi murders. It seems they glossed over the Odinism allegations, including a woman who called in to say her brother and 2 older men killed the victims on the day of the murders. Story 77. Divers at Devil's Hole went missing in a mysterious underwater system and were never found. Story 78. You know what really gets on my nerves about unidentified flying object enthusiasts? There is a case involving an entire region that lasted for months, with thousands of daily witnesses. Fishermen refused to go out to sea for fear of unidentified flying objects emerging from the ocean. There were physical traces, and the Brazilian military got involved. The military called it Operation Saucer. Hundreds of pages of documents are available, and they are wild. Yet every time I bring up Collars, Brazil, 1977, nobody knows about it. Their knowledge is limited to echo chambers and whatever television feeds them. It is a shame. If you like a topic, dig into it. Story 79. Charlene Downs, a 14-year-old girl, went missing and was likely groomed. An urban legend that arose when I was growing up claimed she had been dismembered and her remains made into kebabs and fed to unsuspecting people. But that is almost certainly false. 2 people were prosecuted in connection with that allegation but were found not guilty. Story 80. In 1953, a 10-year-old boy from our town went missing and was found dead 5 days later in a nearby town. He had a skull fracture but was not sexually assaulted. The case remains unsolved. Story 81. Yuba County 5 is a very sad case. The case was dismissed because of their mental impairments, but they were likely targeted because of those impairments. The one witness who gave multiple differing accounts of that night has since died, and I do not know if those boys will ever receive justice. Story 82. I am old-fashioned. I want to know more about John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Coincidentally, today is the anniversary of his assassination. It has been 61 years. Story 83. Twins Livia and Alessia Shep. Xavier de Legans. Story 84. Hinterkaifeck murders. Story 85. Michael Dunahy disappeared at a park in British Columbia, Canada. His mother was there. The child was playing, and when she turned around, he had vanished. Story 86. William Tyrrell, a 3-year-old boy, went missing in New South Wales, Australia, on September 12, 2013, while wearing a Spider-Man costume. He vanished from the front of his foster parents' house. Where is William? Story 87. Paulette Gabarra. There is no way that was an accident. Paulette was about 4 years old and born to a wealthy family in Mexico. When many people arrived one day and could not find her, they reported her missing. About 9 days later, she was discovered wedged between the mattress and the footboard. Someone had slept in the bed, and the sheets had been changed during that time, so I do not see how they could have missed her. Story 88. An Alaskan family was flying their small private plane on September 11, 2001. They were in the air when the Federal Aviation Administration mandated that all aircraft land. A Korean passenger plane was nearly shot down after miscommunication between its pilots and air traffic controllers, partly because the pilots did not understand English. Some people believe the family was shot down, similar to the threat against the Korean passenger plane. Story 89. The Camp Scott murders of Girl Scouts in Oklahoma occurred in 1977. A prison escapee, Jean Leroy Hart, was arrested and charged with the crimes but was found not guilty. He was returned to prison and died there of a heart attack. No other arrests were made in connection with the murders. Story 90. I have always been fascinated by the mythos surrounding the Jack the Ripper murders for whatever reason. Story 91. The Ray Gricker disappearance happened 1 or 2 towns over from where I grew up. It is the town my father grew up in, which explains my great interest. How does a high-profile person, the district attorney, simply disappear? Story 92. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. I know it is kind of an obvious choice, but what the heck? Really? Story 93. Dr. Sneha Philip was last seen on the night of September 10, 2001, and never returned home. Because her apartment was near the World Trade Center, her family believed she ran to the towers to provide medical assistance, but there is no evidence she was at home or at the World Trade Center. Her name appears on the official memorial at Ground Zero after a long legal battle. The case is murky, with reported marital problems, suspected infidelity and possible repressed sexual identity, alcoholism, and work difficulties. Some people believe she witnessed the attacks and started a new life elsewhere, but there is no evidence to support that, and leaving Manhattan that day would have been difficult. Story 94. The Max Headroom broadcast intrusion occurred in the 1980s. It reportedly required expert technical knowledge to override a television studio feed. What was the motive and who was responsible? I do not think we will ever know. Story 95. This is the case of Andrew Gosden. He went missing on September 14, 2007 after buying a one-way ticket to London and was never seen again. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.